In business today, three things to know. First, the Supreme Court gives thumbs up to Hobby Lobby, thumbs down to unions. How two separate decisions change the corporate landscape. Then, General Millions, GM and CEO Mary Barra unveil plans to compensate victims of GM's defective cars, even on a day when GM announces a recall of more than 8.4 million. And vacation getaway.
And this is no longer a vacation. It's a quest.
A quest it is, where Americans are going this 4th of July weekend and how the travel industry is getting us there. Arise Exchange starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz. The U.S. Supreme Court issuing two separate rulings on Monday, one that brought down the hammer on public sector unions and the other delivering a clear victory to privately held companies that oppose certain reproductive rights. The court ruling, 5-4, said Hobby Lobby is within its religious rights to deny health care coverage for some contraceptive pills and devices to its female employees. The court held that privately held businesses may reflect the religious views of its owners. In the other case, also by 5-4, the justices ruled that the public sector unions may not force members to pay dues. Two cases that pull business issues clearly to the right. We'll have more on the Supreme Court cases in a moment. But first, we want to bring you news about General Motors today, and it was a busy day out of Detroit for GM. Trading of GM shares came to a brief halt after the automaker announced yet another recall of 8.4 million vehicles worldwide. The news came after details surrounding the Victims' Compensation Fund was released this morning. Fund Administrator Kenneth Feinberg saying today that GM has agreed to pay without limit to anyone entitled to compensation for death or injury in the 2.6 million GM small cars recalled earlier this year for faulty ignition switches. Here's Feinberg.
They're funding it, and they're funding it without any cap on the aggregate amount of money that's going to be available. GM basically has said whatever it costs to pay all eligible claims under the protocol, they will pay it. There is no ceiling on the aggregate dollars.
Feinberg has become the professional victims manager here because you'll recall his name from the Bernie Madoff Fund and, of course, the BP oil spill. The car coach Lauren Fix has been following the story closely and joins us now. Let us start with these recalls. What did GM do today?
Today, there were 7.6 million vehicles in the U.S. and 8.4 globally. This is a very large recall. This is more than they've sold in a few years of vehicles, but this goes all the way back to 97 and all the way up to current production cars.
And it's the same issue, the faulty ignition switches?
Faulty ignition switches, well, some other minor things in some other vehicles, such as, engine heater blocks and little things. But the big thing, if you look at the numbers, is all the Cadillac CTSs, and that's huge, as well as Chevy Malibus and a lot of other very popular cars.
And so since these recalls go through 2014, it would seem that GM's problems have not quite been solved when it comes to the ignition switches.
Well, it seems to me that, Mary, you can look at it two ways. One, you can say, wow, there's a lot of problems here, and we as taxpayers bailed them out, and why was this not uncovered then? The other way to look at it is, wow, Mary Barra is really going into all the desk drawers underneath all the carpets and pulling out all the documents and saying, why has this not been addressed? And it looks to me as though she's doing her job, which is, let's uncover everything, let's admit everything, we'll roll it out a little bit at a time, because the consumers get a little bit deaf of hearing this.
Does GM have any more cars to recall? I mean, it's how many millions have they recalled this year?
Globally, you got to remember, at some point they had 9 brands.
Yeah,
so if you're looking at 9 brands and this many have been recalled, it's a lot over the few years.
Their stock took a temporary hit today and recovered when it reopened. Mainly, do investors therefore think that this issue really is behind GM and that going forward, because we keep thinking going forward that things are fine, and you have said that you think that the company's getting ahead of the problem, but does this shake your confidence? It didn't shake investors' confidence today.
It certainly didn't. I mean, in the end, they only lost 30 cents per share, which could be typical of a normal day on the stock market. So what I'm thinking is, you got Buick sales still huge in China. GM sales globally are still very strong. They still have a huge profit margin. They have great product on the marketplace. Yes, we have a lot of recalls, but the fact that Mary Barra is getting in front of them, I think, is a huge statement that she's going to turn this company around. And my only concern is that the board lets her do her job.
And how much does the U.S. government have here of responsibility? First, the highway authorities missed the issues. And second, when you're investing in a company to the billions and billions of dollars that the U.S. government did, you are supposed to do some due diligence. And where was that due diligence?
That's what I've been saying all along. You know, Ratner came in there and said, we're taking
Bruce
over.
Ratner, who was the car czar.
Right. He said he's coming in here and I'm going to take over everything and I'm going to show you how it's done. And the fact is he had no automotive experience, and you get the government involved in private industry, it's always a train wreck as far as I'm concerned. And so here's the problem. He knew about it. He said he knew about it, but they didn't do anything about it, and neither did NHTSA.
And, I mean, to some extent you can blame him, but there's got to be more than head rolls here, right? 15 people fired? I mean,
15's not enough. There's got to be more. Some people are going to get away with saying, you know, it wasn't my department. But the fact is, if you really went in there and you really had someone do an actual forensic breakdown, there'd be a lot more people losing their jobs.
Okay, the bigger news, and that sort of overshadowed the earlier news, which was that they've set up this GM compensation fund.
Right.
How is that going to work?
That is really interesting. Initially, we thought we weren't going to get any protection for those people who were in the passenger seat or other victims. Now we're talking about pedestrians, people in the passenger seat, anyone that was involved. You know, Kenneth Feinberg is really doing a great job at saying it doesn't make a difference. I don't care if you were drinking, you were texting. If you can prove that airbag did not deploy, you're part of this fund. If your airbag did deploy, you're not eligible. However, remember, if you do collect the funds, there's no more recourse. You can't go back to GM, and they've already got a calculation figured out. I mean, this gentleman handled the 9/11 fund.
Yeah,
he knows what he's
the
doing.
9/11 fund, he did Bernie Madoff, he did the oil spill.
Right.
So he knows what he's doing. And so GM, this is a smart move by GM, obviously?
I think it is. He's independent. They gave him free reign. They said, you know, whatever it takes. And it's going to be billions of dollars by the time we're done. This is not going to end.
How does GM protect itself financially?
Well, I think it's very difficult. I mean, the first thing is they've got a lot of profit margin that they've been sort of a balloon they've held aside. And there's billions of dollars in that fund. Now, obviously, the average car company would use it to expand on their product line, you know, to create new product. This may hinder some of the future growth. But right now, from what I've seen, and I've been looking at some of the new product coming out, they're trying to do everything. And I think it might be possible.
We'll get to the products in a moment. But what's important here is it's pre-bankruptcy and post-bankruptcy of these cars. So it's going to remove the legal argument that they are not responsible pre-bankruptcy.
Right, and he's saying that doesn't make a difference. The fact is, if your vehicle was in an accident and the airbag did not deploy, doesn't make a difference what the circumstances are. Anyone involved in it, it's actually a lot of people. There's 3,500 claims right now that have been placed out, and they're sending out 2.6 million letters. So you might get a letter in the mail. You may not have a claim, but the fact is, if you do, absolutely get your paperwork in.
Okay, Lauren Fix, very good explanation on all the GM news today. Thank you. To economic news, pending home sales rose a strong 6.1% in May. The numbers from the National Realtors Association suggest that the housing market may be firming up after a very dismal winter. The number surprised analysts to the upside. Wall Street ended the day and the quarter mixed, though it was the sixth straight up quarter for the S&P 500. Let's take a look at the final numbers. The Dow Jones Industrial Average down 27.16 to 16,824. The S&P 500 down 0.75%, and the Nasdaq up 10.25 to 44. Here's a look at some of the stocks we're watching today. British drug maker GlaxoSmithKline says it suffered a breach of security after investigating allegations of bribery in China, and a sex video turned up of one of the company's top executives. GlaxoSmithKline, you don't hear that often about drug company executives. Sex videos closing at 53.48. Google says it is saying goodbye to social network Orkut, launched in 2004. You ever hear of it? Well, a lot of people did. Company says despite hitting 100 million users just a few years ago, Orkut's growth has outpaced by other Google services, and Google closing down $1.02. And American Apparel says it has adopted a one-year stockholder rights plan, also known as a poison pill, in its fight against Dov Charney, its founder and largest shareholder. American Apparel, now less than $1 a share, closing to 94 cents. And looking at commodities, gold at $13.2930 an ounce, and oil closing down 33 cents. Joining us now is Andrew Schiff of Euro Pacific Capital. Welcome back here on Rise Exchange, Andrew.
Thanks. It's nice being here.
Let us start with some news basically out of Europe, and one of the central banks there kind of warning that the other central banks are getting really comfortable with these low interest rates and lulled us all into a false sense of security, something you have been saying for some time now.
Well, it was the Bank of International Settlements, and this is kind of inside baseball stuff for a lot of people, but this is the kind of the central bank of central banks. It takes a lot of the counterparty trades. It's kind of a little shadowy. No one really understands what they do, but there's a lot of eminence there, a lot of senior people. And what they said is, look, you know, stock markets are getting very frothy. There's clearly a lot of euphoria out there in all asset classes, and if we let this run too much longer, although you had a Fed official, the Fed governor of California said we might not see higher rates in 2016, this could get out of hand. Now, the BIS is saying that. Now, the central banks are much more politically focused than the BIS.
They have to report to politicians a little bit.
We like to pretend that the central banks are independent, but they're not. They're political machines.
And so you're holding in a line that we're still in this asset bubble.
Sure.
And that a rise in interest rates, if that does happen, will have a severe impact.
If interest rates were to rise, even a point at this point, you'd see a significant decline. Primarily in the real estate market, you mentioned earlier real estate prices. They did spike up a little bit last quarter, but remember there was the rates came down significantly in the second quarter.
Yeah, we've covered that because they had a very poor first quarter, and a lot of people said it was the higher interest rates.
The bond market right now and the real estate market are incredibly sensitive to rates. So if you see, and this is the big if, because you're not going to see it here in the United States, the Fed's not going to raise rates anytime soon. But if they did to 1%, 2%, to head off this asset bubble that the Bank of International Settlements is talking about, you'd see those markets tank, go down 10, 15%. And that would put a panic in the market, if not more, and that would cause the Fed to come right back in because they don't want to deliver any pain to anybody.
Yeah, and where are they with their stimulus plan right now? Because you believe we're getting probably close to your benchmark where they can't go lower.
Well, right now they're at $35 billion a month. That's what they're buying. They were supposed to go down to zero by the end of the year. They may get there. Depends on how bad the GDP comes in. Now, obviously, the first quarter was a train wreck.
Yeah. And most are writing that off, but they have some vested interest, and there's a debate as to whether it's fair to write it off.
It's not all the weather. I mean, we've done some research on this. At best, the weather explains 2% off of GDP. We had a negative 3% print. A revision for the first quarter. We should see a plus 3% annualized for second quarter. That would make me think that, maybe we got a good second half, but I don't think we're going to get there.
I want to talk to you a little bit about these bank and regulations on banks and sort of going after them here in the United States. BNP Paribas out of France has agreed to about a $9 billion settlement. First, what are they accused of doing, and do they deserve to pay this fine?
Well, $9 billion, that's a big chunk of change. That's big money. That's real money, no matter who you're talking to. It's very complicated. U.S. has sanction laws, and I used to work with some sanction lawyers, so I know a little bit about this. We say you can't trade with these countries because we don't like them. Some of the countries are Sudan, Iran, and Cuba. Now, a lot of times, other foreign countries don't necessarily agree with us on these foreign policy issues. These are matters of state, matters of diplomacy. France, in particular, has a relationship with Cuba. We don't.
But isn't it the price of business with BNP doing business here?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that's the price of business.
The argument.
You want to do business with us, you got to play by our rules. And if you don't play by our rules, we're going to take $9 billion from you. Now, the thing with BNP, they did systematically over a number of years, but still, this is taking money out of shareholders because they slash their dividend. And it's basically the Treasury Department asserting American foreign policy, not through diplomacy or military power, but through financial power.
So would you say that some fine is reasonable, but going for broke here is...
$9 billion, it's hard to say. That'll send a chill into everyone. When you think about what we've done to the Swiss banks and enforcing our tax laws and throwing our weight around and playing, my way or the highway, sooner or later that's going to...
Well, we're enforcing our tax laws, though, because there's a whole bunch of tax dodging, not necessarily illegal, but tax dodging.
But we're the only country that does it. I mean, if you go abroad to avoid our tax laws, we're the only country that's going to, make that other country change their laws. I mean,
we're the big kids on the block.
We're the big kids on the block. And pretty soon people are going to say, I've had enough of you guys. And so I just don't think, given the precariousness of our financial condition, the ascendancy of China, the fragility of the dollar, if we should really play such a heavy. We should maybe play ball a little more.
Okay. Andrew Schiff, thank you so much, as always. Coming up, 2 important Supreme Court rulings today. We will run them down for you. You're watching Arise Exchange.
If I was building my own network, it would be for the people, by the people. It would be very diverse. It would be with every culture you can think of.
If I was to start my own news network, it would reflect positive and negative within the continents and the countries around the world.
I think that I would be more looking towards young people.
If I were to build my own news network, it would look like New York City. Old, young, fresh, hip, classic.
If I was to build my own news network, I would just have people from all over who are very connected and diverse.
If I was to build my own news network, my own world network, I would love a correspondent in every country, every location, every city. I mean, it's kind of unrealistic, but how cool would it be to get local stories from the impoverished country, the impoverished city that we don't know about?
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Welcome back to Arise Exchange. As we told you at the top of the program, the U.S. Supreme Court issuing two important rulings today on its last day in office, and then the justices headed on vacation. Both of these decisions could impact businesses. Joining us to talk more about this is legal analyst Janet Johnson. Janet, welcome to Arise Exchange.
Thanks for having me.
We'll start with the Hobby Lobby case because this was maybe a little bit of a surprise by some, a pretty narrow decision, but the court basically saying that a privately run company can discriminate on religious grounds.
Yeah, and you're right. I was really surprised. I didn't think the court would do this because I think the slippery slope argument is really dangerous. But the court, when they announced this morning that Justice Alito wrote both of the opinions, there was a little bit of a foreshadowing that this would be in favor of Hobby Lobby and, again, on the union decision that we'll talk about. But basically, there's a little bit of misinformation out there. What Hobby Lobby was objecting to were 4 forms of contraception, not all contraception, but 4 forms that include the Plan B or the morning after pill, IUDs, some birth control pills, but basically things that they said lead to an abortion type of result, which I think the science, for one, wasn't behind that. But with that said, the Supreme Court said if you have a religious objection and you're a closely held corporation, which is a lot of companies, you can, for religious reasons, object to contraception and limited it.
And the two really kind of issues here is, one, it's the first time the court has sort of said a business has a religious right, and they sort of work their way around that by saying, well, the business and the owners are kind of tied together in a closed corporation. But then doesn't that give you concern that they've just pierced what we call the corporate veil? A corporation is supposed to be independent of its owners.
Well, right, and there's a couple of issues. One is, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which was signed by Bill Clinton, so everybody...
And written by Senator Kennedy.
Right. That basically allows for nonprofits to invoke this exception, and this is the first time it's been applied to a for-profit. But I think it goes back to treating corporations as people, which is something that Citizens United did and a lot of people object to. But it does basically raise the argument if you say, first of all, for liability purposes, but if you also say, what if there's other religions? And Ginsburg, in her dissent, had a very scathing and well-reasoned argument, I would say, that if this is applied to other religions, which inevitably it will be, and that, yeah, exactly, and that's how they start. This Roberts Court has a 2-step process of initially having a narrow or what looks like a narrow decision, and then that becomes precedent that they rely on. But if you apply this to, let's say, Jehovah's Witnesses, what's to stop a company owned by Jehovah's Witnesses, a closely held corporation, from saying, we don't want to pay for your blood transfusion? That goes against our religious beliefs, and that is a slippery slope. That's the very definition.
Let's turn to the union issue today. The court's saying that public sector workers cannot be compelled to pay union dues. What does that do overall for now private companies and unions?
Right. Well, and this is another one of those decisions where on the face of it, when you first read it, you think, well, it's very narrowly tailored because the people they referred to were these home health care workers. And the hook that they used was basically to say, well, these people are paid by the individuals, the patients. They're not paid by the company. So they can basically opt out. But I think that it will be used, again, as precedent. So, and Alito said, I don't think anybody should be compelled to pay dues. I think this will, again, in step 2, be used to basically do away with any compulsory
mandatory dues and create basically right-to-work environments, I imagine.
Like Florida, where I live. Right.
Janet Johnson from Florida, thank you for walking us through it.
Thanks for having me.
Time now for our business ticker. Stories making headlines across the nation. President Obama has chosen a corporate exec as the new head of the troubled VA. Robert McDonald, most recently chairman of Procter & Gamble, has been officially nominated to be the next Secretary of Veteran Affairs. The administration hopes that McDonald can turn around the government health system that has been plagued by allegations of mismanagement and cover-ups involving long patient waiting times. Facebook users outraged because the social media giant has been secretly experimenting on them. The company altered almost 700,000 users' news feeds to study their emotional response for 1 week in early 2012. Facebook manipulated the content, showing some people a higher number of positive posts and others more negative posts. The results, conducted by Facebook and researchers at 2 universities, were published this month in a prestigious science journal and found those shown more negative content were slightly more likely to produce negative posts, while users in the positive group responded with more upbeat posts. Whatever happened to the days of the government just secretly giving you LSD? Remember those experiments? The labor contract for nearly 20,000 West Coast dock workers is set to expire at the end of today. Failure to reach an agreement could shut down 30 ports stretching from San Diego to Seattle and cause far-reaching disruptions for countless businesses. It's estimated a strike or walkout could cost the U.S. economy more than $2 billion a day. And for those planning a trip to France in the near future, you may be paying a lot more for your visit. That's because the French Parliament has decided to raise the tourist tax. If confirmed by the Senate, the increase will be more than 5 times the hotel tax currently paid by tourists. Many tourist professionals are against the plan, as is the French foreign minister, who is calling it dangerous and totally contrary to the promotion of tourism. Ahead, why you don't expect to get shot at a gun show and how one dealer is our favorite person of the day. You're watching Arise Exchange.
If I was building my own news network, first thing I think I'd want high-quality reporters, very educated, intelligent people.
Hello, I'm Francesca Maxime.
I'm Julian Phillips.
I'm Wendy Gillette.
I'm Sophia Songhai.
I'm Gary Anthony Ramsey. Thank you for joining us here in New York City.
I would like to see more people of color represented in high positions in media.
We've got world-class journalists, veteran journalists who have been in this industry for decades, not just in front of the camera, but behind the scenes as well.
People need to understand the problems that are going on in the community are much closer than we actually think they are.
Kayla Phillips is one of the shoppers who is suing Barney's, and she is here with her attorney. What is it that you want from them?
Not to judge every African-American person that comes in your store.
Time now for our favorite person of the day, when we pick one person who grabbed our attention, and not for the right reasons. If you are in the business of selling guns, it's probably bad customer service to accidentally shoot a potential buyer. But that's what happened at an arms show in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania. Jeffrey Hawk was promoting his gun business that is actually named In Case of Emergency Enterprises. Well, the company certainly earned its name this weekend. While showing off a concealed carry wallet, he accidentally shot a woman in the leg. Hawk told police he thought the gun wasn't loaded and that he performed the demonstration numerous times before without ever causing bodily injuries. After the unfortunate incident, the managers of the Eagle Arms gun show asked Hawk to leave. Apparently, shooting visitors is against the policy of the gun show. Meantime, the gun show itself went on uninterrupted. The woman who was shot, 24-year-old Krista Gearhart, is said to be recovering from a shot in the thigh. It's good she didn't bring her own gun to the gun show, because that could have turned ugly. And so Jeffrey Hawk, who may want to think twice about his career choice now, is our favorite person of the day. Coming up next, where Americans are going this Independence Day and how they are getting there. You're watching Arise Exchange. Stay with us, everyone.
Looking at mainstream news stations where only you have a very small minority of people of color being newscasters and actually having prominent roles in the media.
In a newsroom in the United States, maybe 10% of decision makers come from communities of diversity. That's not right.
Well, diversity is important because the more complete the news is, the more accurate a picture you're getting of the world, and the more you can form an accurate opinion of things.
The vision here is not just to tell the main stories of the day, but to tell the news that other organizations don't tell, and tell it in a way that people like me, people that look like me, that look like you, are interested in.
Arise News.
Arise News.
Arise News.
Arise News.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
As we head into the 4th of July holiday, many Americans are packing their bags and hitting the roads. According to a Travelzoo survey, more Americans are driving to get to their vacation this year, with 57% planning weekend trips. Gabe Saglie is senior editor at Travelzoo, joins us from Santa Barbara now to share some of the most popular destinations and where consumers can get the most value. Gabe, welcome to the program. You going on vacation this summer?
No, I think we keep going back to this whole polar vortex, but really, let's face it, we kicked off the year with some very tough travel conditions for at least the eastern two-thirds of the country. Some significant travel markets were severely affected. We saw bookings for summer travel, including the 4th of July, picking up vigorously even in late January into February. So I think what's happening here is that even though we're seeing gas prices up about 20% year over year for the upcoming 4th of July weekend, and although early predictions that gas prices were going to be leveling off at prices below last year's prices for much of the summer season have been blown out of the water, we're still seeing enough pent-up demand and enough willingness to hit the road or take to the skies across the board. But as you mentioned, most people, in fact, are looking to get behind the wheel and take the family on the road. 57% of the people in our latest survey said they would do that the course of the summer. AAA predicting that 8 out of 10 travelers this upcoming 4th of July weekend will be doing the same.
Gabe, who does that benefit most in the travel industry when people are driving to vacations and not getting on a plane and flying?
Well, I think certainly, car rental companies, see good business on a weekend like the upcoming 4th of July weekend, which is probably the most well-traveled weekend of the summer. For a lot of us, it's sort of really once summer gets underway, it's this first opportunity to hit the road and bring the family along. Hotels are going to be faring quite well as well. We look at much of the Northeast. New York City tops most lists of destinations for the 4th of July weekend. Certainly, patriotic destinations like Philadelphia and Boston do the same. Los Angeles fared very well, and Southern California in general fared very well in our survey, asking folks where they intend to drive.
Gabe, what about airfares? Because we've seen those go up. We have a new tax on tickets for the airfares, which never helps the consumers. Yep. And how much is that going to impact the airlines? That fares are up, taxes are up.
Yeah, that new tax you mentioned is actually a TSA imposed fee. It's actually finally a fee that's not actually imposed by the airlines. It's imposed by
it's a
TSA.
tax. It's imposed by the Transportation Safety Administration.
Exactly. It goes into effect July 21st. What this does is increasing the amount we're paying for security on each leg of our flight. Currently, it's capped at $5 each way. Now they're taxing $5.60 per leg, and that includes a connection if it's more than 4 hours. So now, whereas a round-trip ticket can cost you at most $10 in TSA security fees.
Which is ridiculous, by the way, because you only go through security once. So,
well, exactly right.
I don't know. They're taxing
as you
next
can
time.
imagine, certainly business travelers and most of the air travel advocacy groups are not for this fee. It's intended to raise over the next 10 years right about $12.5 billion. But yeah, what we're going to be seeing here is that your ticket price is going to go up particularly if you've got multi-stop flights. The way to avoid them is to have direct flights, but they tend to be more expensive. Flights with stops in them.
And that hurts, by the way, people who cannot afford to pay full boat on airline tickets, bringing families who use connections to lower their costs. So we're socking them with higher costs. That's a terrific idea. I was surprised by the Travelzoo survey that said 40% of Americans are expected to take a vacation this summer, and I got to think that number is up over the past few years.
Yeah, no, I think that when you look generally at the volume of people actually planning not only just going on vacation, but multiple vacations, like two or three vacations over the course of the summer, numbers are actually reaching levels that we saw back in 2007. So I think that there is definitely a surge here in interest in traveling, and again, not traveling just once during the summer season.
And what about, are people going to locations that maybe were just too cold to go to? I noticed that about 14% of people are going to go to Chicago in the Midwest. Only 20% are going to Southern California. New England, maybe 13%. Do you see maybe a little bit of shift? And we have about 30 seconds left, Gabe.
Well, I think generally people are going to, actually the number one destination was based on the deal. So I think people are willing to go where the deals are. A place like Chicago, which took a hit over the winter season in a big way, naturally is actually we're seeing some very aggressive prices in hotels there in Chicago, much of the Midwest as well, and even in places like New York City, 4th of July prices range between $195 to $250 for 4-star hotels. Very aggressive for New York City, and in Southern California we're seeing some aggressive pricing as well, although not as aggressive as some of these destinations that really took a hit just 3, 4, 5 months ago.
Gabe Saglie, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Tomorrow on Arise Exchange, the co-founder of Essence Communications and Essence Magazine, Edward Lewis, stops by to talk about the power of a brand. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Thanks for watching Arise Exchange. See you tomorrow.